Hi everyone, it's Justin Michael, and I have Tarot of a Moon Garden for you today. This is by Karen Marie Sweikhardt, and printed by U.S. Games sometime around the mid-90s. 1994 is the copyright, though I think the release was in 96. I read online. I don't know, that could be not right. But this particular copy was printed in Italy and in 2010. There's the ISBN number for you. The sides of the box. It's a typical U.S. Games box, but it does feel a little like plasticky. I don't know. And it's also big for U.S. Games, like a U.S. Games box. It's a little bigger than usual. Like it has more space than that. It doesn't sit as flush. I don't know if that's just something in my mind, but it just seems like it has room for, some more cards in there. And that's not typical U.S. Games. But anyway, that was just my initial reaction. I did open this deck up. I didn't really look much through it though. This is the title card. Let's look at the book. Typical U.S. Games book. Nothing worth really mentioning in here. Nothing about the author. This is just the typical kind of definitions of the majors and minors. It might have a spread or two in the back. One spread. And the thickness is, it seems thick, but it's like typical U.S. Games. It's not thin. It's typical U.S. Games of this period, the early 2000s. It's almost like Lisa Hunt, like Ghosts and Spirits, and those types of decks. It's like on that kind of card stock. Although this feels, it's like has like a waxy feel to it, But the card stock is not great. It's not phenomenal, but it's okay. It's not nothing horrible, Certainly not thin. Give it a second to focus in. So this is our fool, and very traditional. Court jester with 3 legs, and it is nighttime in the image. It's like a lot of, from what I saw, there's a lot of, obviously because it's the moon garden, so it takes place at nighttime. Here's the magician. Very mythical, kind of, magical magician. I thought that the colors, just in the first appearance, were a little, they appeared to be a little dull. But I think that's actually just the images, the way they were painted, the colors. It just looks like like that's supposed to be black, but it's faded. But it's not. It's almost like, it's just the style of art. But also you have to keep in mind this deck was printed 10 years ago, so. The older decks, when you look at them, you can see, we're a little spoiled today with printing. Here's the Empress, sitting on a shell. I did notice a lot of like sacred geometry type shell looking images in this deck. For instance, that, and I do love that. It's also the same as the ram's, the ram's horns also. There's an interesting documentary. It's called Inner Worlds. I believe it's Inner Worlds, and it has to do with sacred geometry. It's the Akasha, the Akashic Records or something. Oh, it was phenomenal. Very scientific based and not at all woo. Like, it's really good. So the Hierophant. Very interesting looking image. You know, it's like two people there, but they look like they're one. Sort of one structure. You know, with the angel presiding over. It's very RWS though. Really cool looking chariot with the yin yang in the middle. Six-pointed star. And we have at card 8 strength. Sorry about the glare. Almost looks like the Lion King lion. We have the Hermit. That's really interesting, a Wheel of Fortune carousel with the RWS imagery still on there. You have the Hebrew letters and the Egyptian Sphinx up at the top. Lady Justice. There's our Hangman. Very interesting looking death card, you know, with the dragon. Very mythical. And that's really, really colorful. Still with the RWS imagery, I really like the pinks in this. The rainbow water. The devil. You can see two individuals in there, sort of trapped inside there. And here's a chain. It's like, you have to look a little close to see. It's like they're trapped, you know. And that's very interesting. You have like the shell kind of shape here with the what looks like a wave, like a tidal wave. But then again, is it a tidal wave or is it a plant? I don't know. It's hard to know. Looks almost like a lighthouse. I think that's a plant because it is a garden theme, but it almost looks like a tidal wave. Huh. There's the star. There's a lot going on here. Interesting. There's the moon. Wow, that's really interesting. The two faces of the moon. And a crayfish. Looks like a lobster. The sun. Beautiful artwork. Like I said, it's very fantasy, you know. There's Judgment. A lot going on here. Trying to see. And then we have our Lady World. Animal Monday. King of Swords. Queen of Swords, but her head is below the clouds. That's interesting. You know, in RWS, the idea behind the Queen of Swords is that she's like the Widow Queen. You know, she's like, she cuts through the bullshit and this and that. But her head is above the clouds, which means she's, you know, indicates that she's, at least to me, that she's, you know, she's always focused and she sees the bigger picture. Her head is above the clouds, but in this, slightly below. I don't know. It's, I always found that to be important symbolism in RWS, the fact that her head was above the clouds. There's the knight. I don't know why that jumped out at me. I have a thing for the Queen of Swords. When she shows up in a reading for me, usually has to deal with grief and death, like dealing with the loss of someone. Swords. And the Ten of Swords. It's interesting because it's going from 10 and down to ace, which is sort of like the Kabbalistic way. You know, it corresponds with the tree. The tree goes from low to high, and so that's probably why it's like that. Instead of ace, then the ace to the court cards. You know, which you usually see. But really, if you're going by the Kabbalistic method, and I don't know what the original RWS is, I think the original RWS order is the ace is the end card, is the last card, if I'm not mistaken. It's the 7 swords. I don't know, it's hard to keep track of. Everybody has a different order, and I don't think it's really that important anyway. And here's the 6 of swords. And 5 of swords. Steven just snuck by me. He's trying to photobomb my video here. A lot of butterflies in this deck. Unicorns, butterflies, very fantastical. That's really cute. For the 3 of swords, you have the heart here. But it's still like, you know, in the garden. I like that card. And 2 of swords. A lot of RWS. And the ace. That's an interesting ace of swords. And then we have the king. King of staffs. And queen. Yeah, see, the background is much darker now. You know, it's getting darker. I don't know. It was just it has something to do with the suit or what. It's very dark now. You know, it just seemed a little dull to me. That's all. Initially in the majors, Ten of Staffs. It's weird. It's like I get a lot of water vibes from this. Like I know it's obviously the suit of fire. I mean it's the staffs, but like almost like is that a lake? Like what am I looking at there? Look like something floating on the lake, or like waves, you know. But that's the thing about the forest, you know. It's like there are silhouettes and illusions, you know, in the forest, and so. It's kind of realistic that way. When you're looking at something, you're like, not quite sure what it is. Oh yeah. Yeah, because the Three of Wands, he's looking out. Duh. I'm not even thinking in terms of, I'm just going to go back to this card. Obviously, that's the ocean, and instead of boats, you know, you have like a floating dragon of some sort. Or maybe it is a boat because I see a flag there. Oh, I just had a moment. Obviously. I totally missed that RWS symbolism. This too. The aces are very different, you know, they have their own personality. Not too RWS with the hand coming from the cloud and all that, you know. Cups. And there's the Queen. They're beautiful images. I like this deck. Our Grail Knight. Get lost in these images. I think if they did this deck today, though, like in a modern version, it doesn't even have to be borderless, just bigger and, you know, clearer. It would be a lot more interesting. You know, because this is the kind of deck you can get lost in. This would be a good borderless deck. I just think the artist would have to recreate it in some sense, or they would have to, you know, do something digitally to expand the images. The borders are a little intrusive in that regard, you know. But that's typical of U.S. games in this type of deck. You know, you see that a lot. Like also with like Lisa Hunt decks, for instance. I don't know if it was the Fantastical Creatures tarot that I was thinking of, but I went and grabbed it just to look at it. But I thought it was like a similar type of border. I don't know where I've seen this border, but I've seen it before, or something similar to it. I thought it might have been Fantastical Creatures, but it's not. It's like you know, seen it before with U.S. games decks, but maybe it's not U.S. games. I think like our collective taste has changed so much since this deck was printed that, you know, I don't think a deck like this would be printed today with these kind of borders. Yeah, maybe they will. Maybe they would, but it just seems like something that wouldn't really work today. And the Two of Cups. And we're into the Pentacles. Well, welcome to a realm where myth and magic are reality. Cute deck, very vintage looking, psychedelic. I'd be interested to read with these actually, just to see, because it's very deep with symbolism, you know, and the images are almost like, you know, you can get lost in them, especially those watery type images. It's very dark and almost like a scrying mechanism or something, you know. Yep. Well, anyway, thank you for tuning in. I hope you guys are well, staying sane, and hopefully everything goes back to normal soon, because I'm getting very antsy. Just a word about my numerology series. More than likely it will be up tomorrow night. I have I got a new book. It's the Pythagorean Tarot, and it's a very complex book, and it's really changing the way I see things, and I think it'll be very helpful in doing my numerology series. So I may take an extra day just to mull everything over, but sometime this week I'll have it out, and you know, you'll see when it's up. And I will do it weekly after that. At that point, but I'm just kind of, the more I study, I feel like the less I know. You know, it's like, you know, the whole purpose to do the numerology series is also as a resource for myself. And you know, when you are working on a project, that is the best way to learn. You know, in my experience. But because this book is really changing the way I see things, You know, like for instance, I thought that well, I don't want to talk too much about this, but I thought that you know, the Kabbalah, the Kabbalistic tree, the Sephiroth, and the Pythagorean methods were two different approaches in tarot, but actually they're very, very, very similar. There's slight differences, but apparently, I just learned this in the book. The Kabbalistic tree, the Sefer Yetzirah, was actually written by a Neo-Pythagorean in like the 5th or 6th century. So it's based on Pythagorean ideas, the Sephiroth, not like ancient Jewish. And some of the key words in Kabbalah were translated from Greek, it seems. So I just want to take a couple more days possibly to read this, but I may have my first series out before then, I don't know. But anyway, I'll keep you posted. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Be well. Thanks. Bye-bye.